Welcome everyone to Milfuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Severance Season 2 Episode 9. It's called The After Hours. So spoilers for the episode. It's the penultimate episode of the season, so you expect it to leave you on a bit of a build, a bit of a cliffhanger for the finale, and I think it does fairly well. I was pretty critical of last week's episode, and honestly even more so after seeing this one, because to be honest, now that I've watched the following episode, I'm like, episode 8 could have been cut down to like 5 or so minutes and just been the cold open for this episode. It really could have been. All you really needed was Cobell getting her file, confronting her auntie, and then being on the road away and getting the call from Devin and Mark. Like, that's it. That's all you needed. And it would have given you everything, I think, that we really needed from that episode. But I won't harp on last week's episode. Let's enjoy what we've got here, which is mostly a good episode. There's a lot of things in here to like. There's two particular scenes that I thought really stood out and I really loved. There's a couple of oddities here. There's a couple of things that maybe feel a little underwhelming, and if this is truly some things wrapping up, I would say. Probably my biggest critique would be that it's just a little bit weird that seemingly Devin, Mark, and Cobell just kind of hang out in a forest for several hours waiting for it to get dark. And the reason why that's weird is just because, well, did they stand in silence? Wouldn't Mark and Devin be demanding some answers, the things she knows? Because they even say in one of the scenes, hey, she knows where Gemma is. So why aren't they demanding answers, right? I mean, Cobell even says, you know, has your any finished the file? Probably not. And they're like, what file? And she's like, Cold Harbor. And then she never elaborates. She says that, oh, once the file's finished, she might already be dead, right? If it's already been finished, she might already be dead. And Mark obviously gets pissed at that. But they stood there for several hours and they didn't demand answers for what Cold Harbor was or whatever. Maybe they'll reveal they did next week. But it didn't feel like they did. It felt like they stood there awkwardly for several hours until it was nighttime so they could go do what they were waiting to do. And it's a little bit of a problem from like a pacing perspective or a momentum perspective in their plot. Because it feels like you could easily fix this problem of just having them meet Cobell later in the episode, right? Have them not meet Cobell until it's like already almost nighttime and it's like time to just go. So you don't have this weird feeling of them hanging around and like they're almost effectively spinning plates just to kill time until it's ready to move on forward with the plot with those characters. Not that we spend that time with them, I don't mean that, but just this idea that the characters themselves feel like they had to have just been waiting around until it was time to go. However, the problem with that is that they really wanted the scene where Mark has to call into work and talk to Milchick. So that means that they have to meet Cobell much earlier in the day when it makes sense that he would still be calling in sick or whatever. So, and I get why they wanted that because it is one of the two best scenes of the episode, so I kind of sympathize, but maybe there was a way to, you know, maybe have Cobell call them and say, hey, call in to work, call in to Milchick, and like make yourself clear for being away for the day. And have her not be there yet. I guess that's how you fix it, right? Have her just tell them to do that over the phone because it's important, and then Mark can do that with Devin just on their own as they're waiting for Cobell to show up. That's maybe how you fix it. So that's like my one like major critique of this episode is that it just kind of felt weird that those characters would be standing around and not demanding answers. Now, maybe Cobell would refuse to give them answers, but you at least have them try a little bit so we can see that she's refusing. So that just felt a little bit weird. But where that goes at the end, of course, with this plot, which is they want to speak to any Mark, and they go to one of those, you know, they go to like a compound, and they even get inside because Cobell knows the code words to get in, and mentions that Devin, who's in the other seat, because Mark's hiding in the back, they can't see him. Cobell says that Devin, doesn't use her name, of course, but says that she's one of James' girls. I know it says the word girl, but it's to be hush-hush. No one's to know about it. And this seems to be a normal thing. So the rich old white man who runs this company, Helena's father, apparently gets visitors like this, women visitors, that are supposed to be kept secret. Now, what is he doing with them? Now, normally I would just say, oh, he's having affairs, right? That's what's happening here. But he seems more sinister than that. And then you mix in the idea of Severance, and then you mix in what he says at the start of this episode to Helena about how he wishes she would eat the eggs raw. And I don't know. I don't know how to feel about what James up to. I feel like James Egan is probably doing something far more nefarious than just having sex. Maybe I'm letting my mind go wild there with the theorization, but I don't know, that creeped me out. Even though it feels believable, the powerful man at the top of the company would have secret visitors like this for his, I assume, pleasure. But we could get into, I guess, more of that theorizing at any time, really, and what he's up to. Maybe we'll get some answers to that next week, because it felt like we were getting a little bit more teases about him this episode, not just from this, but also from his interactions with Helena / Helly. But the episode ends with Mark, any Mark, kind of waking up. And I did like the quick transition to this, where they're getting the all clear to drive in, and it just does the Severance zoom on Mark's face, and he's standing there in this room, and Devon's just trying to calm him down, says, don't walk outside because you'll just appear back in here. And we know that's true. That's how it works when they try and leave somewhere that's, sever enabled, or when that person's severance chip has been activated in a location, right? You go through the barrier, you just go to the outie will walk back in, and you'll just be right here again. So Devon tries to keep him calm, says, hey, come with me, and Cobell stands there all sinister, which is, even if she's technically a valid choice to help right now, I still think she's got her own ulterior motive. Maybe she's not like Team Lumen, or at the very least, I don't think she's Team Egan. Maybe she's hoping she can take over the company with whatever she's about to try and do with Mark and whatever. But it does feel like she's sinister and she's got more cooking than she's letting on. But it just kind of ends with Mark confirming to the audience. I mean, most of us probably guessed by this point that this is any Mark and not outie Mark. It's pretty clear, but the final thing that's said is, hey, do you remember the last thing you said to me being Devon? And he says, she's alive. And it kind of sets us up for, oh, they're going to have a really candid chat about with any Mark about what's going on, and he's going to presumably tell them stuff. It's really exciting for Devon to be there to sort of hear a lot of this, and I'm excited to see her reactions. Hopefully we get to see some of that next episode. The ending of this was good, and it's got me excited for next episode. But like I say, the waiting around in the forest seemingly for the entire day is a little bit strange. Outside, of course, of the phone call to Milchick. Now, before we talk about that, I want to talk about Milchick stuff as well first, because Milchick stuff also has the other great, phenomenal scene in this episode. And that is the scene where he finally stands up to Drummond. So he's stressed at work, right? He's taking it out on Miss Hong. He's making her smash her little game as like a tribute of her moving on to the next stage of her fellowship, or her fellowship's ending and she's getting transferred somewhere to deal with world peace or something. I thought it was a whole thing. And she clearly is sad that she's moving on, and it feels like he's lashing out a little bit, but he makes her smash her thing. And notably, and I think this is an important detail here, is that she uses the statue head of Keir to smash the game that she plays. And Milchick stands behind her and he says, again. And she smashes it again, and he's like, again. And he gets a little bit of anger in the voice. And that's kind of where the scene ends. The reason why that's important is because later on, when he stands up to Drummond, it's also when Drummond is saying the word again to again belittle Milchick. And it's almost like I really like the idea that Milchick might have realized that the reason why he knows what Drummond's doing right here is because he was doing it to Miss Hong earlier. He was throwing his weight around. He was showing his dominance and saying, hey, I'm in charge. You have to obey me. Like he was doing that to someone else earlier, and now he's being the victim of it himself. And obviously it's a little conflicting because we know he's helped keep Gemma locked up, so we don't like him for that. His treatment of Miss Hong in the start of this episode is unlikable, so it's not like we just erase that because he's got his own things going on. But he is a victim of this stuff too, and part of the reason why he is the way he is because he has been raised in this system like Miss Hong seems to be raised in it, where he's been told that this is what's important, that this is all that matters, so on and so on. So you can dislike the choices he's made, and you can even hate him for some of the things that he's been party to, but also sympathize with why he's also a victim and why it might still be very fulfilling to see him break out of this in some capacity. So yeah, the build up to this scene is really good. It's so good because it references several things from earlier in the season. He's effectively getting blamed for Mark not being at work, right? We even get a little glimpse of Gemma again. We get a glimpse of her doctor, and he's upset because the numbers aren't going up. It's Monday. Why isn't Cold Harbor going up? And it turns out it's just because Mark's not there. It makes sense, right? We know he's not there. He's off going to see Cobell. He's got the reintegration stuff to deal with. He's got his whole thing going on. And Drummond says this was meant to be a great day for Lumen. They're up in the balcony in the middle of the building, and he's like, hey, this was meant to be a great day for us, and this is your fault. You were meant to be tightening the leash, so on, so on. And he basically demands an apology, but he demands an apology specifically when Milchick uses a big word. I don't even remember what the big word was at this point, to be honest. But Drummond turns, and of course, one of the things that they complained about back when they were being petty was that he uses too many big words. So Drummond turns and says, apologize for the word. And he really emphasizes it. And it really feels like, oh, he is putting his foot down right now. And he's trying to tighten the leash. He's trying to make Milchick feel like he has to obey his masters here. It's very demeaning. It's very whatever. And Milchick turns and he says, I apologize. And Drummond says, shorter. So he's pulling Milchick down. Apologize is even too big of a word now. Where Milchick's like, I'm sorry, Mr. Drummond. And he's obeying, right? And I think this idea of like you're supposed to be tightening the leash, I think that line's absolutely intentional, because in this episode, we have a dog in one plot for a start, which I'm not saying that's important necessarily, but I think this thematic idea of like a master controlling their pet and the pet having to obey their master is very much a thing that runs throughout this episode. And I don't think it's an accident that Drummond uses that phrase right before he tries to talk to Milchick like an animal, where he's demanding an order, where he's saying, bark for me kind of thing. It's super demeaning. And there's a moment, and that's the thing, he says the apology. He even says the shorter version. He says, I'm sorry. But it's when Drummond steps in and says again. And Milchick tries to kind of like pivot and say, Mr. Drummond. He's like, again. Like he reiterates it again. And it's just like what Milchick was doing to Miss Hong at the start of the episode. And this is when he turns and says, devour feculence. And what I love about this is that most audience members, it'll take a second. It just takes that one little second. And of course, he's going to clear it up. Milchick's about to explain and dumb it down for him. There's one point where it's not this part, but it's like a line afterwards where he says, let me put it monosyllabically. Look, too many L's in that word for me to say. But, he sort of rises up against Drummond a little bit. But he explains what it means. He says, that means eat shit. But what I love is that the audience gets to realize what he just said, and it just maybe takes a second to click, because you're like, wait, what did he just say? And not only is he saying eat shit, he's saying eat shit defiantly in the way that they have told him not to speak. And he throws his weight around a little bit and says, hey, I am the manager of the severed floor. That means I demand a modicum of respect, even from my superiors. And frankly, what Mark S. does outside of the building when he's not at work has nothing to do with me. My jurisdiction ends at the edges of the Severance floor. That's it. What he does out there is your fault, and walks away, leaving Drummond fuming, frankly, but ultimately unable to really give much of a rebuttal. And I think it's very satisfying. Even any mixed feelings you might have about Milchick right now, him doing this is super satisfying. And the fact that he does it by saying he followed protocol, like he's following the rules that they're supposed to follow. He brings up his jurisdiction, he brings up what his duties are, and what's expected of him, and says he's fulfilling that adequately. He's following the rules and what he's supposed to be doing. This isn't suddenly just his fault because something's happened outside of work. That's out of his control. Of course it's out of his control, but that's not how they do this. They want someone to blame. They blame him. They put pressure on him, and this is him rising up. And this scene was fantastic, and it's almost right after that we get the other scene, which is Mark phoning Milchick to basically give an excuse for not being in work. So, love that sequence. It was definitely the highlight of the episode for me. And then just under that was this following sequence with Mark on the phone, where Mark starts by lying, saying he was worried about the nosebleed, so he's went to a clinic in a different town, and they want to do more tests. And Milchick, spins like, hey, you're an important employee. We want to make sure you're in here. Give me your exact location. We'll send a car, and you'll be under looming care. And Mark, and you're not really sure if because he didn't really want to make this excuse in the first place. He wanted to tell Cobalt to go F herself. But he does sort of think on his feet and say, okay, I'm not sick. I just needed a day, right? I needed a day. Milchick asks why. He's like, look, it's life stuff. And what I loved about this conversation, and it mirrors the previous scene with Milchick and Drummond so well, because Milchick used what's supposed to be the rules that everyone's following to back up what he was saying so that Drummond really couldn't argue with him, really. Mark kind of does the same thing here, where Mark says, I need a life day. Isn't that what Lumen's about? Isn't that what they always say, that balance is important? So the fact that Mark is using their own mantra against them, but the fact that also affects Milchick, because Milchick, because the moment where he says that, the moment, isn't work just work. That's a line he says. He says on the phone, after all, life is important, balance is important, and work is just work. And you get this shot of Milchick standing in his office, and he's just standing there. He's looking up at the wall, and he looks at the painting or the photograph that's on the wall, and he's tearing up. But that initial wide shot of him just standing there in this empty, white, barren office room just feels so depressing. And it's the reason why it works is because he has devoted his life to his work. We have seen that. We have seen that he's willing to jump through all the hoops and do everything that he's told to be a good employee, even when they don't appreciate him for it. And it's only just now that he's starting to finally feel almost the monkey's paw of that, and like finally start to feel frustrated and want to kind of rise up against it. Even if maybe that's too strong a term for what he's feeling right now. But this is just after he's finally snapped at Drummond and had to sort of basically fight for a little bit of his own respect back. And to hear Mark just say, work is just work, this stuff is more important, to a man who has found himself trapped in this situation where he's constantly having to prove himself, he's constantly have to be the good employee, to hear someone else say, that's just work, everything else out there is more important. And I assume that Milchick, from what little we know about his personal life, I don't think he has one, because he's been too devoted to this. He's been too devoted to working up the ranks and being the best employee he can be. I don't think he has that. And I think that, the idea that he doesn't have that other side, that's the irony here, is that, he's not severed, but he also doesn't have an outie. He's just an innie. He admittedly, some, the adults that put him through, a scholarship or made him work up through the ranks or whatever, they probably encouraged him and set him on a certain path. So it's not all his fault. But regardless if it's all his fault or it's other people who put him in this position at an early stage in life and he kind of never got off the tracks, either way, he's found himself in a position where he has let himself become just an innie. And that is tragic. Never just be an innie. It's great if you love your work, obviously, if you're passionate about what you do, if you're creative, or if you do something important where you're saving lives. Obviously, a doctor should feel pretty passionate about helping people live, right? There's obviously fulfilling jobs on a higher level than just putting in a day's work. There absolutely is. But that's not what this is. He's a manager of a floor in a business building. This is not what this is. So I think there's a lot of layers here. And I think that's why he gets emotional. That's why he gets affected. And I think it's also why he doesn't fight Mark on this. I think he hears this And he just says, "Do I have your assurance that you'll be in tomorrow?" And Mark promises that he will be in work tomorrow. And he leaves it at that. He doesn't, send out the dogs after him. He doesn't like call up the food chain to like go looking for Mark. He just accepts this. And I think on some level it's because he wants to accept it. He wants that because he thinks he needs it for himself, probably. And he would love to give it to himself, but he can at least give it to Mark right now. There's a lot going on there. I just think the character development for these two scenes, specifically for Milchick, are phenomenal. As much as it's kind of a Mark scene because Mark's the main character and it's about him explaining why he's not there. I think the emotional reaction from Milchick, and because of the placement of it right after that other Drummond scene, all of that felt like that's where we got the meat of this. This scene came from the Milchick side of it, which is really good, and it makes him a very layered character. Even if we are conflicted about how he's ended up helping do some nefarious things, and that's even a theme throughout the episode in some ways with Burt, right? Where Burt kind of, he comes for Irving, and it's very menacing, intimidating, and we're not really sure if Burt's driving Irving out to his death. Like, he might be taking him somewhere to kill him. We don't know. But ultimately, he's taking them to a train station to have him leave and never come back. He wants to sort of save him by telling him to get out of town, right? It's kind of a classic trope in a lot of ways. But it's this idea that, yeah, like, he's done a lot of bad things for Lumen. He says he never killed anyone. He always just drove people to places, and he didn't really know what happened after that. And, Irving even says, "Is that what this is? Are you taking me somewhere and you don't know what they're going to do to me?" And it's very, if anything, it's arguably a little bit milked more than it should be during the middle of the episode. But when they get to the train station, like, we get this great scene, but this idea to tie it with the Milchick stuff, that, okay, he has done bad things, and he's kind of become aware over his life that he's done bad things, or he's helped others do bad things, he's helped the company do bad things. And that's why he's severed, is because he wanted there to be an innocent part of himself, right? And then says, my innocent part fell in love with you. And, it's a really emotional. Burt gets all kind of like, "Oh, I've never felt love before. I think I'm ready to feel loved. I want it." And he leans in, and it's like, maybe they'll kiss, maybe he'll convince Burt to run away with him, or maybe whatever. And Burt sort of holds steady and says, "No, just go. It can't happen." And it's kind of sad, and Irving rides off into the sunset. And it, honestly, like, if it wasn't for the fact that there's still the mystery of who Irving was talking to and reporting his findings to, I would probably say that this might be Irving's exit in the show, which I think, while the moment itself is kind of sweet, and I do like the interaction between the two characters, it would be a little underwhelming overall, I think, for Irving's departure, if this is it. But I mean, we don't know yet. Like, chances are that, we're getting at least one more season, I would expect. They've not announced that officially yet, but I doubt this is the end. I think there'll be at least a third season before we're all said and done. I could see 3 being the last one, though, for sure. It's a very sweet scene, and this idea of a character, like, going down this path with a company like Milchick, and for a much longer time Burt, and kind of realizing and having regrets about what you've done as part of that system, and part of, like, what you've done to appease your bosses, your masters, whatever you want to call it, and then finding some innocence in some way. Now, Burt did that with being severed. Who knows how Milchick will find that? Well, like, if Milchick is really going to have a redemption and truly turn against the company, like, yeah, there has to be a moment where he helps somehow, like, chooses to save Gemma, or chooses to save someone, or something selfless. Like, there's so much potential there that could really land and hit hard if they do it. So, yeah, and and then this idea of, like, the opposite happening, because that's kind of Dylan's story in some ways, is that, not that he's lost his innocence, he's not done anything bad, he's just kind of lost his happiness over the years, and we get the fallout of Gretchen kissing any Dylan at work, where she tries to open up about it to outwit Dylan, and he understandably feels very weird and upset by it. And it's one of those things where it's a really good scene, and a really good science fiction, like, enabled scene, because the idea of him feeling conflicted and cheated on, but feeling also violated because his own body was used to do it, is something that's only achievable, really, via a science fiction premise. And I think that she is doing the right thing by trying to be honest about it, and has some valid arguments as to why it doesn't really feel like cheating per se, but you also kind of sympathize to him. It's a different person, and this was done in secret, and also with his body. So the continued exploration of those themes I really like. He even threatens to quit, and then any Dylan, she comes to see him and says she has to stop coming here. She has to stop seeing him. She has to make the right choice to, help her marriage and continue working on the outside version of Dylan, regardless of, how this more innocent young version, well, not young, he's not physically younger, but you know what I mean, like younger mentally, where he's not lost all of his passion and he's still got all this hope in him, kind of thing. He doesn't want to accept that either, and he even tries to propose to Gretchen. He wants this to be a continuing thing, and it's a little bit heartbreaking, and she knows it's heartbreaking, and she has to just apologize as she cries and leaves the room. And it's a soul crushing scene, and it really just, like, I think Dylan's story more than any really paint just the normal idea of how awful Severance is as a concept. Because you've got the any Dylan who never gets to experience all the happy things of life. All he experiences is work. And this one little carrot he was given of seeing his real wife for these short visits, he's fallen in love with her. Because why would he? He's like, of course he would. Like, he doesn't get to have contact with anyone else. And he's told this woman in the real life and the outside world, in some ways, is his partner, is his love of his life, even if he doesn't see himself as that same person. So he effectively ends his life by requesting to leave, by requesting, to quit his job. Which I guess maybe they were being honest about that being an option for the innies at the start of this season, because they definitely didn't want Helly doing that in season 1. But, maybe they'll just throw him back in. Maybe Outie Dylan won't agree. But then again, Outie Dylan seemed like he was thinking about quitting anyway, based on all this. So, yeah, like, what's happened here is that any Dylan is this super innocent character who, like, doesn't deserve what he's going through, doesn't deserve the pain of the rejection that he's just had, and wants to end his existence by quitting. And that's what him walking into the elevator is him ending his existence. But for the outside version of Dylan, who isn't a villain in all this, like, he now, like, kind of hates a part of himself because he feels betrayed by this any version that he has no control over. And it's almost like it's just made him realize just how unhappy his wife might be, especially since Gretchen said that it, because he sort of says at one point, "Oh, you're going to tell me it doesn't mean anything," and she's like, "I wasn't going to say that because I think it does mean something, right? There is something here." Like, he probably feels worse now on the outside because his wife is more attracted to this less flawed version of himself, that he is not good enough anymore. That the figment of some other version of him that he used to be is more appealing to his wife than he is obviously going to hurt. It's always going to eat at him. So, like, yeah, all of this is sympathetic and just tragic. There's, like, none of, like, Dylan, any or Outie or Gretchen, I don't think any of them are villains here. Severance itself is the villain in this. And everything that's happening with them is just why it's a bad idea. So, yeah, really, really interesting. And just continuing the sort of the ideas that I love this show exploring, that was very much in there. And there's even a nice little moment where Miss Hong apologizes to Dylan as he's leaving, saying that she should have, like, facilitated the meetings better. And he tells her it's not her fault. He gives her a little bit of humanity in the moment. And it's funny because, like, she was such a weird character at the start of the season, because, like, why is there a kid here? But now that we're at the end of a season, and it's like, oh no, Egan and the company, Lumen, just, they're all into child labor. They're into this old school idea of child labor, and only a select few who punish and push themselves to be noticed get to have a proper, rise up through the ranks and education, even to get to these positions. They want devout followers like a cult who believe in, most companies might not admit that, but they kind of do want devout followers. They want people who think the job is the most important thing in their life. And from a health perspective, I would say that most people should not think like that. Your life is more important than your job. You need the job, obviously, for various reasons, but life is more important. And it just, like, all this is really good stuff. I should also mention here, I didn't notice this. Admittedly, I had a quick look at what people were saying after I watched the episode. And there's apparently a quote from a Twilight Zone episode. Which I think it's the code words that the guard and Miss Cobell say as they're going into the location at the end. That's a quote from a Twilight Zone episode, which is also called After Hours, or The After Hours. Now, I have watched all of classic Twilight Zone. In fact, I reviewed all of it on the channel. I finished it only last year, even. So I was like, oh, what episode was that? Because, I don't remember all the titles. So I googled Twilight Zone After Hours and found the episode. Now, it's a season 1 episode. It's a very good season 1 episode, which is about mannequins at a department store who kind of take turns being real people for like a period of time. And they kind of like come back and turn into mannequins, and then another mannequin gets their turn at being, I guess I'll just say, an outie. So it's not the exact plot of Severance by any means, but there's definitely some thematic crossover and parallels going on with that episode of Twilight Zone. So if you want a little bit of extra homework viewing, I assume this episode might have been an inspiration for some of the concept, or at the very least is something that the creators are a fan of and wanting to draw parallels to. Especially since this episode, we have effectively the death of an Innie, and in some ways two Innies, just in the sense that, I mean, Irving had already died, don't get me wrong, but he is, him going off into the sunset kind of feels like, oh, he's definitely, like, or maybe it's not even a death, maybe it's like the happy ending for the outie, as we have the death of an Innie, potentially with Dylan, and what do you even call what's happening to Mark's Innie? Like, once reintegration happens, are they both kind of alive, the Innie and outie? Where does that sort of land? We'll have to kind of see how it works once they start really talking to each other and he really kind of merges between them. So the one thing I've not spoken about yet really is Helly. So we actually get Helena early on eating her egg, notably splitting her egg in half on a plate that has like the 2 children on it, like the twins. And it's like an embryo splitting. I don't know. It was a really very, very like direct choice to give this a specific look, right? They wanted you to be thinking about it that way. And this is where Jay Megan says, I wish you'd take them raw, which is a disturbing phrase. It's a disturbing phrase. So, yeah, again, it's another example of her cold life, her home life existence. This place is just this big empty space. There's no love, there's no warmth, none of that. Also, notably, at the end of the scene when she's driving to work, or being driven to work, the camera pulls out, and before we go to the title screens, there's it focuses on the water tower in the foreground. I don't know if that means anything, or if there's something that we're going to do with that water tower, but it felt like it was really emphasizing it, so pointing that out. But once she's Helly again, she's expecting to see Mark, and Mark's not there. So she just storms into Milchick's office, and this also feeds into Milchick's plot. Actually, now I'm thinking about it, because she basically goes in and throws her weight around a little bit, and Milchick's like, "Hey, you can't just come in here." And Helly doesn't care. Helly's like demanding to know where's Mark, and he's like, "I can't tell you." And she's like, "Look, he was having a nosebleed. I want to know if he's okay." And ultimately, though, the really interesting part here is that when Milchick calls her Helly R, she's like, "Don't you mean Helly E?" And Milchick kind of like puts his foot down and says, "Helena Egan is my superior. You are not. You work for me." And he tries to like throw his weight around, and she just kind of like leans in, really kind of smug, and like is like, yeah, sure it is. I mean, I can't remember the exact line she says, but it definitely had this kind of demeanor of, yeah, okay, what are you going to do to me? Like, come on. It really felt like she kind of knows her place, in the sense that she, because of who she is on the outside, even though she hates her outie, right? She does. And that even gets us to another great scene with Dylan, actually, where after Dylan's had his heart broken, she tries to tell him, hey, keep that little ring you made for someone that you meet in here. There could be more people. And Dylan, of course, is just on the spiral downwards because of how he feels. And he kind of like makes her feel bad in a way, because she tries to say, hey, like, we're real too, or, and he's like, well, how come, like, if we're that important, how come we couldn't even tell when you weren't really you? And she says, Irving could. And it's, yeah, she's right. Irving could tell. It was kind of sweet almost that he could. But then Dylan hits back with, well, Mark couldn't. And that just obviously makes her feel like shit. And it just leaves in this really downer of a moment. She's trying to convince Dylan to like help her, go get those clues that Irving left with the directions on it, and go find that red door, or the red elevator. And of course, Dylan goes and does what he does separately, and she just goes and gets the note. It's actually, I suppose that's one of the interesting things about the structure, or maybe maybe a slight negative to the structure of this episode, is that it felt like there was a lot of good Helly stuff early on in the first half of the episode, and it kind of felt like she kind of faded into the background until it was time for just the final bit, where Jamie Egan shows up when she's trying to memorize the directions, and she's clearly there too late, and Jamie Egan shows up behind her, and I loved it when he says whatever, my Helena or whatever, she turns and says, who the F, at him, which felt like the perfect, like, Helly, like, response. And I'm actually really, this is the other main cliffhanger, I would say. Obviously the main things with Mark and like the Innie talking to the others, but I think Helly confronting her father and getting to say all the things that outie Helena is too much of, frankly, a pussy to ever stand up to him, might be really satisfying. Like, it might be really, now maybe he's got some plans here, maybe he wants to do some really bad things and like ruin like her sense of like self-realization, her her self-confidence, her power, whatever you want to call it. Maybe he's going to try and break her. Maybe he's fascinated by the idea of his daughter's Innie. I don't know. Like, there's lots of ways this could go bad, but I think the way that I'm excited by is the idea of Helly basically standing up and saying F you and saying whatever she wants to. And the way that we got a tease with her doing that with Milchick this episode, maybe this idea of she, like, in some ways gets to say all the things that outie Helena would never have the balls to say. And there's some really fascinating ideas there. And it feeds back into everything we were saying at the start of the season about how Helena, like, the idea that Helena, without all that upbringing and all that control and that loveless, like, childhood she probably had, led to who she is in the outside world. And with all those, like, influences removed, and she gets to be who she really just is at her core, this unfiltered version, she's this stronger person who stands up for herself and wants to fight her way out and kind of is everything that her outie isn't. So seeing her actually get to confront the father with that is kind of cool. So I'm excited by that too. Yeah, so it was a very good episode. It just isn't up to there with one of the best episodes, just purely because it felt like a collection of good plots that were all kind of smushed together, because we have to do all this stuff before we get to the finale, right? There was like 4 plots going on kind of unevenly throughout the episode, and it didn't feel like as much of a cohesive whole as something like the Gemma episode did, or some of the other stronger episodes have. That said, though, that core theme that mainly was, central to Milchick, did sort of like feed in from other plot lines in the episode, such as Helly sticking up for herself to Milchick, with Mark sticking up to Milchick. Like, there was kind of a nice through line there in some respects, and the idea of the innocent version, and that was a parallel for me between Burt saying he had this innocent version, and then what's going on with Dylan and the idea of this younger innocent version. It's all very fascinating stuff, and I'm excited to see what we do with the finale. So yeah, and it's a long finale. The runtime is there to see. The finale is like 75 minutes, so I'm excited for that, especially after a couple of shorter episodes. Hopefully they go all out and we get some really cool stuff next time. But it does kind of feel like maybe Dylan and Irving won't even be in the finale, which is a little bit weird. But I mean, we'll see. We'll see what they've got. Maybe they'll be important later when we come back for season 3, or maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm just assuming too many things, and there's some important stuff for them to do next time. But it would be nice to check in on them at least. Maybe see what Outie Dylan says to his wife afterwards or something. But that is my thoughts on this week's Severance. So let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments, of course. Like, subscribe, all that usual stuff. And of course, you can go over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep all the reviews coming. Wouldn't be able to do it without Patreon and stuff like that. So YouTube membership is also an option, but Patreon gets you all the bonuses for the Mail Fuzz movie channel as well. So worth recommending that instead. But thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?